What he just said has Leafs fans fired up as Stanley Cup winner Sam Bennett had some very interesting things to say about the Toronto Maple Leafs and their fans. So I'm going to break down those surprising comments as well as discuss rumors that are starting to pick up surrounding Sam Bennett joining the Toronto Maple Leafs when he is set to become a free agent. So I'm going to break all that down on this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the 70 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself as we're on the road to 12,000 subscribers. With Darius, Sam Bennett, he did, and he is a Stanley Cup winner. And now he had some interesting things to say about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is not something we expected to make a video on, but rumors are starting to pick up about him potentially joining the Leafs after next season. Maybe they could trade for him, whatever it ends up being. But these comments have Leafs fans fired up, and what he spoke about, it's very rare you see a player come out and just directly talk about another team's fan base and what they had to say about him. Obviously, he lives in Toronto. There's some things there, but he said, they hate me, but they always end with, I want you to be a Leaf one day. And basically, Panthers forward and Cup champ Sam Bennett went on first up 10:50 and gave insight on how Leafs fans greet him around the GTA area in the offseason. Because, again, he lives there in the offseason. It's funny because I'm here all summer. They say they hate me, but they always say they want to end up with him a Leaf one day. And this obviously prompted a lot of rumors, a lot of fans saying, okay, let's get him to Toronto, some things like that. What are your thoughts on this from these interesting comments that is from Sam Bennett?
Yeah, pretty funny, I think, because, of the fan reaction and everything like that. And, when you look back at guys like Nazem Kadri and even Brad Marchand, who plays for the Boston Bruins, those are the types that, like, you hate them when they play against you, but you would love them on your team. And a lot of Leaf fans, of course, love Nazem Kadri. And we don't see it from the other side, at least in Nazem Kadri's role, because he played for Colorado and in the Western Conference with Calgary now, right? So we don't see him on the other side of the coin. But guys like Brad Marchand, they're, horrible to play against, but you'd love them on your team. And this is another example of that. Sam Bennett, he would look great as a Maple Leaf. He's exactly the type of player, once he found purpose in Florida, he's exactly the type of player that you win Stanley Cups with. So it's pretty funny. He does live in Etobicoke in the offseason. I assume he's training. So he probably runs into fans all the time. And yes, Leaf fans kind of hate him because of that whole thing that happened in the playoff series a couple of years ago. And he injured Matthew Nyes. And, he's just a tough guy to play against. And he would look perfect on the Leafs. So obviously, yes, we do hate that player per se, but he would look great as a Maple Leaf. So pretty interesting comments. And he is a free agent at the end of this year. So maybe that's, we've been talking a lot about left wings and the Leafs' lack thereof. If they don't end up signing anybody here and they kind of ride out the season the way they are, maybe they're looking for another left wing in next year's offseason, or next offseason, I should say. Maybe it's Sam Bennett.
Yeah, obviously, he's the type of player you love to have on your team, but then hate playing against him. We've seen it several times, and that's obviously what the fan sentiment has echoed. And he obviously loves Toronto. He lives there, chooses to live there in the offseason. So maybe there's a world. Now, it's going to be up to the Panthers on whether or not they try to retain him. Obviously, I'm sure there's some sort of relationship that's been built there. They won a cup together. And it's very interesting. If you weren't aware of the fact that he lives in Toronto during the summer, then this comment would have been a bit weirder. But it makes a lot more sense now that, if you understand that he does live in Toronto. So that's why he's talking about the Leafs. But this is from David Alter. He is a UFA at the end of the season. Would he be what they need in the future? He is an unrestricted free agent, to be clear, at the end of the upcoming season, so you never know where the player may end up next. He did give a scouting report on OEL, whom the Leafs signed to a 4-year, $14 million contract on July 1st. So now, Darius, we ask you this, and I'll dive into my opinion as well and get into some of the stats. This is super interesting because it's a player that, again, we're looking pretty far now into the season after next. But what is your thoughts on Sam Bennett? I know you gave your brief opinion there, but David Alter was the one who actually came out and said, could it make sense? He's exactly the type of player that the Leafs need. We talked about them needing wingers, specifically left wingers. I think he fits the bill entirely. And maybe there's a world where the Leafs end up with Sam Bennett. And it almost seems like a match made in heaven to a degree here.
Yeah, I just have to say off the bat, though, the fact that he lives in Toronto in the summer and then he gets to live in Florida in the winter is like prime living conditions. That guy has it figured out. That is exactly the way you should be doing it. But yeah, in terms of him becoming a Maple Leaf next season, you have a lot of money coming off the books, right? And obviously you have to re-sign a couple guys, and Joseph Wool's contract will kick in next year. And, Matthew Nyes, you got to re-sign. So yes, there's money coming in and out in a way, right?
Lilligren
But Mitch,
contract.
we don't know Lilligren contract. Maybe you move off of that, which we've been talking about. But, Mitch Marner, his contract is up. We have no idea what's going to happen with that. Obviously, John Tavares, if he stays, it's looking likely he's going to be making a lot less. So maybe there's room to get a guy like Bennett. We don't know what that contract's going to look like. Obviously, it's going to command probably a raise. He's Stanley Cup champion now, right? He comes with that pedigree and he's that type of player. But maybe you look at an option like that. He's exactly the type of player that the Leafs need. I was a little upset when they traded Nazem Kadri because he's exactly the type of player the Leafs could use right now, right? Like this is kind of the problem with the team right now, trading away guys who play that style of hockey, and he plays exactly the style that it takes to win the Stanley Cup. So I think it's something they should at least look at next season, especially if you're going to lose Mitch Marner. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with that, but that is definitely an option. It's a very real possibility that he walks in next year's free agency. So I wonder if you not replace him, but you add to your lineup with a guy like Sam Bennett. I think it's a very interesting idea and honestly exciting because I love the fact of when the Leafs, or I love when the Leafs add Stanley Cup champions to their lineup, because you need, I think, more guys who've been there and done that. They did it with Stolars this year, obviously OEL. So both recent champions just last year too, which is good. So I love that when they do that.
Yeah, we're obviously, this isn't pressing news because the Leafs new season is about to start, but it really kind of goes, and this is important even now for this season because of, you mentioned it, the cap space that the Leafs are going to have one way or the other. Obviously, Joseph Wall, his contract's going to kick in. We have the Liljegren stuff. But what happens with Mitch Marner has all the more impact on what they're going to decide to do with players like this. Because obviously, if they spend a huge chunk on Mitch Marner, they're going to be way less inclined and maybe not even have the cap space, depending on what other moves they make, to sign a guy like Sam Bennett. So there's going to be a lot of players available. And that's why the whole Mitch Marner thing is going to be such a pressing issue. I mean, it is right now, but specifically going into the trade deadline and the offseason. I can't imagine there's a world where they trade off Mitch Marner at the deadline unless the Craig Berube experiment turns into be a disaster and they're out of a playoff spot. But it goes to show that the cap space is going to be very interesting if they choose to let Mitch Marner walk, because then you're opening up yourself to a lot of potential UFA options like Sam Bennett. And there are a lot of players, despite the fact that the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won playoff games, there is a lot of players who like to join the Toronto Maple Leafs. Chris Tanev, one of the top, not the top, but one of the best defensemen available, join the Toronto Maple Leafs. OEL just won the Stanley Cup, join the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it opens up a lot of different opportunities for them. And if you have a guy like Sam Bennett who seems to not necessarily want to be a Leaf right now, but potentially want to be a Leaf in the future, depending on what happens, he obviously lives in Toronto, you have to take that up. And that's why the Mitch Marner contract at this point is all the more interesting going forward, specifically regarding his contract heading into next season.
I would definitely take Sam Bennett on the Leafs if it's the next couple of years or even next year, right? But I don't want it to turn into a situation like he's kind of, I don't know if he's alluding to it, but some fans are alluding to, one day you can be a Maple Leaf, right? Then it kind of turns into the Eric Lindros thing where he comes at the end of his career and it's like, great, I'm finally a Maple Leaf, but there's no impact there. And they keep signing old guys and kind of get into that rhythm that they were in the mid 2000s. So I would want to avoid that. But if it's in the next couple of years, you're adding a guy with Stanley Cup pedigree, right? And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's won a Stanley Cup and he's lived in Florida now. So maybe he wants to give it a shot in Toronto closer to home. Maybe, right? We don't know exactly how he's feeling. If I was him, maybe you want to continue to play on a really good team that can win the Stanley Cup in Florida. That's not bad. That's not a bad situation, but anything is possible. And we'll just have to see if he's a good fit onto the Leafs team and it works out that way in free agency. I could see that happening, but that is a little ways away and we'll see how the team shakes out until then, because at the end of the day, it's about what's best for the Toronto Maple Leafs as a team, right? So if he doesn't fit in, then that is what it is, but they could use a player like that. So pretty interesting there.
Yeah. Coming off of back-to-back 40-point seasons, he still has a bit of fuel left to the fire, but let us know in the comments your thoughts are on this. Just an interesting talking point for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it has a lot of impacts with the Mitch Marner contract. And let us know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on all of this. Very interesting that Sam Bennett got himself caught up in the Maple Leafs news cycle, but that'll wrap it up. Let us know. We'll see you tomorrow.